Hello everyone. There seems to be an attitude amongst some members of the gaming community that gaming has been getting worse over the past few years. This is an opinion I see quite often and sometimes sympathise with, at least to some extent. But is this really the case? Have games really gotten worse despite budgets being bigger than ever before? And were older games actually better than modern titles? Many gamers don't seem to be satisfied with recent releases, and for this sentiment to exist, it's got to come from somewhere. The most obvious thing that's ticking people off is games releasing in an unfinished or otherwise poor state. There are several high-profile examples of this, like Cyberpunk 2077, Fallout 76, Anthem, No Man's Sky, and many more. Generally, unfinished games seem to be missing features, have performance issues or game-breaking bugs on launch, and sometimes all of the above. In most cases, unfinished games are later patched and updated into an enjoyable state after a massive fan backlash has already taken place. Another issue is the prevalence of additional in-game purchases and microtransactions in full-price releases, and these are unpopular with many players. In many cases, games are designed to subtly direct players towards the in-game cash shop, and this can feel exploitative in the worst cases. Microtransactions used to be the domain of free-to-play games, but their presence in paid games has become more and more common in recent years, and they show no signs of going away due to how profitable they are. Recently, Dragon's Dogma 2 launched with a few performance issues and several additional microtransactions on a game that already costs more than £50 on Steam here in the UK, and the backlash caused by this is at least part of the reason the game has a mixed rating on Steam, despite many reviewers praising the actual core gameplay mechanics. Due to the extremely large development costs involved in modern games, many titles opt to play it quite safe with the genres, stories and mechanics used, in an attempt to appeal to as many people as possible to recoup development costs. This may be what has led to a recent trend of remakes and remasters, as re-releasing a successful game is seen as a less risky investment by many big companies. This perceived lack of variety and innovation in big budget games is disappointing to many players. With all of that said, it's very easy to remember things in the past as being better than they actually were, and this is especially true when it comes to games. For the most part, we only remember the best releases from decades gone by, and most mediocre or bad games are simply forgotten about. Back in the late 90s, games like Final Fantasy VII, Half-Life, the original StarCraft, and Metal Gear Solid all came out within a couple of years of each other. Each of these are monumental titles that had a huge influence on their respective genres, but most of the games from this era were mediocre just like today, and those other titles have largely been forgotten. Here's a list of PlayStation 1 games that I looked at as part of the research for making this video, and it's absolutely full of games I've never even heard of, and you probably haven't either. I'm not saying that any of the games on this list are bad, but what I am saying is that not every release from the 90s was on the level of Chrono Trigger like some people would have you believe. This goes for every decade and console generation as well. Back in the PlayStation 2 days, things were the same. For every masterpiece like Metal Gear Solid 2, several forgettable games would release. There have always been good games and average ones. At least part of the reason old games seem better is because we largely only remember the great ones and forget about the rest. During the late 2000s and early 2010s, Call of Duty was the biggest game on the market, which led to many other developers building similar military-style FPS games. Even many non-FPS titles followed design trends that were popularised by the Modern Warfare series, like more of a focus on cinematic set pieces and a decreased emphasis on things like player decision making. There's nothing inherently wrong with this style of design, but the unfortunate truth is that chasing trends often leads to mediocrity. At least if you ask me, the variety of games on offer has actually increased since then, as developers have realised that just copying Call of Duty isn't going to make their product a success. We even got a return to big budget arena style shooters with 2 new Doom games in 2016 and 2020. The indie scene frequently creates new titles in different genres or styles that AAA studios generally don't touch, like Hotline Miami or Undertale, and some of those indie games have been massively commercially successful. In many ways, the modern gaming scene offers more variety to players than ever before if you're willing to look for it. Your backlog of classic games from previous years is mostly still there for you to go back and enjoy, with the unfortunate exception of old live service games or MMOs that can't be played because the servers don't exist anymore. The variety of games on offer is only increasing. Just because the new thing that everyone's talking about isn't something you want to play doesn't invalidate the enjoyment you can get out of a 20-year-old title. If you mainly enjoy single player games, it can seem like the only way things can go is up. Either a game is worth buying and adding to your collection, or it isn't, at which point you're no worse off than before as long as you didn't buy it without waiting for the reviews. Final Fantasy XVI released in 2023 as a fully complete product with no microtransactions, no major defects and no obviously missing features, and it wasn't the only game to be generally well received by fans that year either. The narrative that every modern game releases in a poor state isn't really an argument that holds up to scrutiny. However, I can understand those that feel like the general direction of the market is moving away from the type of games they like. Personally, I'm a fan of deep stealth action games, and those seem to be few and far between nowadays. It's all too often that a new release will be aggressively monetized in a way that harms user experience and suffers from several launch day bugs and performance issues that will be patched into a more acceptable state later on. And this regularly causes early adopters, who are some of the most engaged fans, to be the most disappointed with new products. If you were expecting a definitive answer to the title of this video, I'm going to have to leave you disappointed, as after making this, I've realised that the true answer to that question is going to depend on what's important to you personally. There are very valid concerns with some gaming industry trends nowadays, but we tend to look back on the past with nostalgia and remember it being better than it was. What I can give you instead is a piece of advice. If you're finding yourself dissatisfied with most of the games you acquired recently, try looking in a different place to usual. This might mean trying a new genre outside your traditional comfort zone, or rediscovering an old title you used to play many years ago. If you only play console games, make a Steam account and try some on PC instead. If you don't normally play indie games, you might get more enjoyment out of them than you thought. By experiencing something new, you might be positively surprised. Several of my most favourite games of all time have been things I didn't think I was going to like before I tried them. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful, and thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.